The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Clarence House as King Charles III stood by his study window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 75, the weight of the crown had aged him beyond his years, but today's burden felt heavier than any state matter he had ever faced. The ornate desk behind him held a stack of documents that would change everything for the woman he loved most in the world. Camilla, now queen consort, had no idea what storm was brewing. She sat in the breakfast room, delicately sipping her morning tea while scanning through her daily schedule. Her lady-in-waiting had arranged meetings with various charitable organizations, a fitting routine for someone who had spent years building her reputation from the shadows of public disapproval to respected royal status. The transformation hadn't been easy, but she had earned her place through dedication and genuine care for her causes. The king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, entered the study with measured steps. His face bore the expression of a man carrying unwelcome news. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "the investigation has been completed. The findings are substantial." Charles turned from the window, his blue eyes reflecting years of pain and difficult decisions. "How substantial, Clive?" "Substantial enough to warrant immediate action, sir. The financial irregularities span several years, and the connections run deeper than we initially suspected." Sir Clive placed a leather-bound folder on the desk. "The Queen Consort's family members have been systematically exploiting their royal connections for personal gain." The revelation wasn't entirely shocking to Charles. Whispers and rumors had circulated for months about Camilla's relatives using their royal association to secure lucrative business deals and social advantages. What surprised him was the extent of their activities. According to the report, Camilla's son Tom Parker Bowles had been accepting substantial payments from companies seeking royal endorsements, while her daughter Laura Lopes had been involved in property deals that raised serious ethical questions. Charles opened the folder with trembling fingers. Page after page revealed a web of questionable transactions, inappropriate use of royal connections, and blatant commercialization of the family's status. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Phone records showed conversations where royal access was promised in exchange for money. Bank statements revealed mysterious deposits that coincided with favorable business outcomes for various companies. "Has the Queen Consort been made aware of these activities?" Charles asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "There's no evidence of her direct involvement, Your Majesty. However, the investigation suggests she may have been willfully blind to her family's actions. Several witnesses report conversations where concerns were raised but no action was taken." This information hit Charles like a physical blow. Throughout their long relationship, he had defended Camilla against critics who questioned her motives and integrity. He had fought public opinion, family disapproval, and media scrutiny to make her his wife and eventually queen consort. The thought that she might have knowingly allowed her family to exploit their position felt like a betrayal of everything they had built together. Meanwhile, in the breakfast room, Camilla noticed the unusual quiet in the house. Typically, Charles would join her for their morning routine, discussing the day's events and sharing observations about their various responsibilities. Today, however, she sensed something different in the atmosphere. The staff moved with careful precision, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her son Tom. "Mum, need to talk urgently. Something's happening with the press. They're asking questions about my business dealings." Camilla frowned, setting down her teacup with a slight tremor in her hand. Tom had always been somewhat cavalier about trading on the family name, but she had assumed his activities remained within acceptable bounds. A second message arrived from her daughter Laura. "Mother, we need to meet immediately. There are men in suits asking questions about my property investments." They mentioned the palace. Camilla's stomach tightened with dread. She had worked so hard to build respect and acceptance as a member of the royal family. The journey from being reviled as the other woman to becoming a beloved queen consort had taken decades of careful behavior and genuine service. The thought that her children might have jeopardized everything filled her with a cold fear. She made her way to Charles's study, her heels clicking against the marble floor with increasing urgency. The door was slightly ajar and she could hear muffled voices inside. As she approached, the conversation became clearer. "The damage to the monarchy's reputation could be significant," she heard Sir Clive saying. The public is already sensitive about royal finances and privileges. This kind of scandal could undo years of rebuilding trust. And my options? Charles's voice was strained, barely recognizable. Given the severity of the evidence, Your Majesty, exile from court activities would be the minimum response. Complete separation from royal duties and privileges would demonstrate that the monarchy takes these matters seriously. Camilla's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Exile. The word echoed in her mind like a death sentence. Everything she had worked for, everything they had built together was crumbling around her. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart racing as the full implications of what she was hearing began to sink in. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years being criticized for her past, for breaking up Charles's marriage to Diana, for being an outsider who didn't deserve her position, just when she had finally gained acceptance and respect. Her own family had potentially destroyed it all through their greed and poor judgment. Charles' voice continued, heavy with resignation. When do we move forward with this? The sooner the better, sir. Every day of delay increases the risk of public exposure and makes the situation more difficult to manage. Camilla closed her eyes, leaning against the cool wall as tears began to form. In that moment, she realized that the fairy tale she had lived for the past few years was about to become a nightmare, and there might be no way back from the choices her family had made. The confrontation came sooner than Camilla expected. That afternoon, as she sat in her private sitting room trying to process the morning's revelations, Charles entered without his usual warm greeting. His face was pale, aged by the weight of what he had to do. In his hands he carried the damning report that would change their lives forever. "We need to talk," he said simply, settling into the chair across from her. The distance between them felt like an ocean. Camilla looked at her husband, the man she had loved for over 30 years, and saw a stranger. Gone was the gentle, understanding Charles who had stood by her through every scandal and criticism. In his place sat the King of England, bound by duty and the preservation of the monarchy above all else. "I know about Tom and Laura," Charles began, his voice carefully controlled. "The financial improprieties, the abuse of royal connections, the commercial exploitation of our family name." "Charles, I can explain." Camilla started, but he held up his hand. "Can you? Because according to this report, you were made aware of questionable activities months ago and chose to do nothing." His blue eyes, once filled with warmth when they looked at her, now held disappointment so deep it made her physically ill. Camilla's hand shook as she reached for her teacup, needing something to hold on to. "I thought they were just being entrepreneurial. I had no idea the extent of what they were doing." "Willful ignorance isn't innocence, Camilla." Charles opened the folder, revealing pages of evidence. "Your son accepted £3 million from a pharmaceutical company in exchange for promising royal endorsement of their products. Your daughter used her royal connection to secure planning permission for a development project that should never have been approved." Each revelation hit Camilla like a physical blow. She had suspected her children were taking advantage of their elevated status, but she had chosen to believe their reassurances that everything was legitimate. The alternative, admitting that her family was corrupt, had been too painful to face. "They're my children, Charles. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to stop them." His voice rose slightly, betraying the emotion he was trying to contain. "You were supposed to understand that being queen consort comes with responsibilities that extend beyond your personal family loyalties." The weight of his words settled between them like a wall. Camilla had spent years learning to navigate royal protocol, understanding the delicate balance between public duty and private life. But when it came to her children, she had allowed maternal instinct to override royal responsibility. "What happens now?" she whispered, though she dreaded the answer. Charles stood and walked to the window, unable to look at her as he delivered the verdict. "The Privy Council has been informed. Parliament will be briefed. And you—" He paused, his shoulders sagging with the burden of what he had to say. "You and your family will be exiled from all royal activities." The word exiled hung in the air like a death sentence. Camilla felt the blood drain from her face as the full implications hit her. No more royal duties, no more charitable patronages, no more state occasions. She would become a royal wife in name only, stripped of the purpose and identity she had spent years building. "For how long?" she managed to ask. "Indefinitely," Charles turned back to face her, and she saw tears in his eyes. The damage to the monarchy's reputation would be too great if we appeared to condone this behavior. The public trust we've worked so hard to rebuild would be shattered. Camilla stood on unsteady legs, moving toward him with desperate hope. Charles, please. We can fix this. We can make Tom and Laura return the money, issue public apologies. It's too late for that. He stepped back from her outstretched hand, the gesture more painful than any words.
The investigation is complete.
The evidence will become public within days. The only way to protect the institution is to show that we take decisive action against corruption, even when it involves family. The cruelty of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. Charles had waited decades to marry Camilla, enduring public criticism and family disapproval to finally make her his wife. They had weathered the storms of Diana's death, public opinion, and the challenges of blending their families. Now, just when Camilla had gained acceptance and respect as queen consort, it was all being taken away. What about us? Camilla asked, her voice breaking. What about our marriage? Charles's silence was answer enough. The man who had once declared he would move heaven and earth to be with her now stood frozen, torn between love and duty. The crown on his head weighed heavier than the love in his heart. I don't know, he finally admitted. I honestly don't know. That evening, Camilla called an emergency family meeting. Tom and Laura arrived at Clarence House with lawyers and advisors, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. The comfortable family gathering space felt like a courtroom as they sat around the antique table that had witnessed happier family moments. How could you be so reckless? Camilla demanded, her usual composure shattered. Did you not understand what you were risking? Not just for yourselves, but for all of us. Tom, usually confident and charming, looked uncomfortable in his expensive suit. Mom, everyone does business this way. We weren't doing anything illegal. Legal and appropriate are not the same thing, Camilla shot back. You traded on the royal name for personal profit. You compromised the integrity of the monarchy for money. Laura, quieter than her brother but equally defensive, spoke up. We never asked for this life. We didn't choose to become royal stepchildren. If people wanted to do business with us because of our connections, why shouldn't we benefit? The selfishness of the statement took Camilla's breath away. Her children had grown up privileged and educated, but apparently without understanding the basic principles of integrity and responsibility that should have guided their actions. Because it's wrong, she said simply, and now your selfishness has destroyed everything I've worked for. The lawyers began discussing damage control strategies, potential settlements, and legal ramifications, but Camilla stopped listening. The technical details of their downfall seemed less important than the fundamental truth that her family had betrayed not just the royal institution, but her personally. As the meeting dragged on into the night, Camilla realized that this wasn't just about exile from royal duties. This was about the complete collapse of the life she had built, the identity she had crafted, and the love story that had defined her existence. The woman who had once been reviled as a homewrecker and eventually redeemed herself as a dedicated queen consort was about to become something else entirely, a royal exile, cast out by the very institution she had fought so hard to serve. The news broke on a gray Tuesday morning, splashed across every newspaper and website in the kingdom. Royal corruption scandal, screamed the headlines, accompanied by unflattering photos of Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes leaving their lawyers' offices. Within hours, the story had spread globally, with international media dissecting every detail of the Parker Bowles family's financial dealings. Camilla sat in her private quarters at Clarence House, curtains drawn, unable to face the world outside. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from journalists, friends, and royal correspondents seeking comments or inside information. She had turned off the television after seeing her own image displayed alongside headlines questioning her fitness to be queen consort. Charles had left for an official engagement in Scotland, unable to postpone his duties despite the personal crisis. Before departing, he had barely spoken to her, their conversation limited to logistics about public statements and legal proceedings. The emotional distance between them had grown into a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Your Majesty, her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, entered cautiously. The palace press office needs guidance on responding to media inquiries. They're asking specifically about your knowledge of your children's activities. Camilla looked up from the newspaper she had been staring at without reading. What are they saying about me? Sarah hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. The coverage varies, ma'am. Some outlets are suggesting you were complicit. Others are portraying you as a victim of your family's actions. The most damaging stories claim you used royal influence to help your children's businesses. The accusation felt like a knife to her heart. Throughout her years as queen consort, Camilla had been scrupulously careful about maintaining boundaries between her royal role and personal relationships. She had deliberately avoided involvement in her children's business affairs to prevent exactly this type of controversy. "And what does the king say publicly?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. His Majesty's statement was brief. He expressed disappointment in the actions that have come to light and assured the public that appropriate measures would be taken to address any improprieties. The formal language of Charles's response told Camilla everything she needed to know. In public, he was king first, husband second. The man who had once defied his mother, the establishment, and public opinion to marry her was now choosing duty over their relationship. Meanwhile, across London, Tom Parker Bowles sat in his expensive apartment, watching his world collapse in real time. His food writing career, built on a combination of talent and name recognition, was in ruins. Publishers were canceling contracts, restaurants were withdrawing invitations, and his agent had stopped returning his calls. The money he had received from various companies suddenly felt worthless compared to what he was losing. His sister Laura faced similar consequences. Her interior design business, which had thrived partly due to her royal connections, was hemorrhaging clients. Society magazines that had once featured her work were now running exposé pieces about her questionable property deals. The carefully cultivated life of privilege and success was crumbling around both siblings. At Highgrove House, Charles's beloved country estate, staff members whispered in corners about the uncertain future. Would the king divorce his wife? Would Camilla be stripped of her titles? The questions that dominated public speculation were equally present in the minds of those who served the royal household. Daily, Charles himself struggled with decisions that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. In his private moments, away from advisors and protocol officers, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his personal loss. The woman he had loved for over 3 decades, who had stood by him through his own scandals and difficulties, was now the source of the monarchy's greatest crisis in years. Queen Elizabeth II's former private secretary called to offer advice, reminding Charles of how his mother had handled various family scandals during her reign. "Sometimes, Your Majesty," the elderly man said carefully, "the institution must be protected even from those we love most." The conversation haunted Charles as he attempted to focus on his royal duties. During a visit to a children's hospital, he smiled for cameras and spoke warmly with patients. But palace staff noticed the strain in his eyes. The man who had waited so long to become king was discovering that the crown's weight included sacrifices he had never imagined. Back at Clarence House, Camilla made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She called a meeting with the palace's most senior communications advisor, determined to take control of her narrative rather than remain a passive victim of circumstances. "I want to make a public statement," she announced, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Ma'am, the legal advisors strongly recommend against any public comments until the investigation is complete," the advisor replied carefully. "I don't care what the lawyers say. I won't hide while my reputation is destroyed by speculation and rumor." Camilla straightened in her chair, displaying the steel that had helped her survive decades of public scrutiny. "I need people to know the truth about my involvement, or lack thereof, in my children's activities." The statement she crafted was carefully worded but emotionally honest. She acknowledged her children's poor judgment while maintaining her own innocence of any wrongdoing. She expressed deep regret for the embarrassment caused to the royal family and the British people, but stopped short of accepting responsibility for actions she hadn't committed. "I have served as queen consort with integrity and dedication," she wrote. "While I cannot defend my children's choices, I will not allow their mistakes to define my service to the crown or my loyalty to His Majesty." When Charles read the draft statement from Scotland, he called her immediately. It was their first real conversation since the scandal broke. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I have to do something, Charles. I can't just disappear quietly." This will make things more complicated. The palace has been trying to manage the story quietly. The palace's strategy isn't working. Every day of silence makes me look more guilty. Camilla's voice cracked slightly. I need you to know that I never knowingly allowed Tom and Laura to exploit their royal connections. I may have been naive, but I wasn't complicit. The line went quiet for so long that Camilla wondered if Charles had hung up. Finally, he spoke. I want to believe you. I need to believe you. But the evidence suggests you had opportunities to stop this and chose not to. Then you don't know me at all, Camilla replied, her hurt transforming into anger. After everything we've been through together, after all the ways I've proven my loyalty to you and the crown, you're willing to believe I would betray everything for my children's financial gain? Charles didn't answer. And in that silence, Camilla heard the end of more than just her royal career. She was hearing the death of a love story that had survived scandal, public hatred, and family opposition, only to be destroyed by the greed of her own children and the weakness of the man she had devoted her life to defending. I'll issue my statement tomorrow, she said finally. With or without your approval. The call ended without goodbyes, leaving both of them alone with the wreckage of what had once been an unshakable partnership. The fairy tale that had taken decades to write was ending, not with happily ever after, but with exile, betrayal, and the bitter taste of love sacrificed to duty. Camilla's public statement sent shockwaves through the British establishment. Released without prior consultation with palace officials, it represented the first time a senior royal had directly challenged the institution's crisis management strategy. Within hours of publication, the palace was forced to issue its own response, carefully worded to avoid contradicting the Queen Consort, while maintaining institutional authority. The reaction was swift and divided. Some commentators praised Camilla's courage in defending herself, while others criticized her for breaking royal protocol during a sensitive investigation. Social media exploded with opinions, hashtags, and conspiracy theories about the true extent of her knowledge regarding her children's activities. Charles returned from Scotland to find the situation had escalated beyond his control. The woman he had married for love had become a political problem that threatened the stability of his reign. In the oak-paneled meeting room at Buckingham Palace, his closest advisors presented him with options that all seemed to lead toward personal tragedy. The public is demanding decisive action. Your Majesty, the cabinet secretary explained, spreading polling data across the mahogany table. Trust in the monarchy has dropped to levels not seen since the Diana years. The Queen Consort's statement, while personally compelling, has created the impression of a divided royal household. Sir Clive Alderton, who had served Charles for years, delivered the most painful assessment. The investigation has uncovered new evidence suggesting the Queen Consort may have attended social events where these business dealings were discussed openly. While not direct participation, it raises questions about willful blindness. Charles felt physically ill as the walls closed in around the woman he loved. Each new piece of evidence, each public opinion poll, each advisor's recommendation pushed him further from Camilla and closer to a decision that would haunt him forever. What are my options? He asked, though he suspected he already knew. Immediate separation of royal duties pending a full inquiry, came the response. The Queen Consort would retain her titles but lose all official functions. Alternatively, a more permanent solution would involve complete severance from royal life. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality. They were discussing the destruction of his marriage and the exile of his wife. Charles stared out the window at the crowds of tourists photographing the palace gates, wondering if they could imagine the human drama playing out behind those walls. Meanwhile, Camilla faced her own reckoning. Tom and Laura had arrived at Clarence House for what would prove to be a devastating family confrontation. The siblings, accompanied by their lawyers, seemed more concerned with their legal exposure than the damage they had caused to their mother's life. We need to discuss coordinating our public responses, Tom began, consulting notes prepared by his legal team. The family needs to present a unified front against these accusations. Camilla looked at her son with a mixture of love and revulsion. There is no unified front, Tom. You and Laura have destroyed everything I worked to build. That's not fair, Mother, Laura interjected. We never asked you to marry the king. We never wanted to be royal stepchildren. If people were willing to pay for access to royal events, why shouldn't we benefit? The callousness of the statement left Camilla speechless. Her children had grown up privileged, educated at the finest schools, given opportunities that millions could only dream of. Yet they seemed incapable of understanding basic concepts of integrity and responsibility. Because it's wrong, she said simply. Because it corrupts everything the monarchy stands for. Because it makes me complicit in your greed. Tom's lawyer leaned forward. Mrs. Parker Bowles needs to understand that any public statements admitting family wrongdoing could have serious legal implications for our clients. Your clients are my children, Camilla snapped. And they have put me in an impossible position where defending them means betraying my husband and destroying my marriage. The meeting deteriorated from there, with lawyers discussing settlement strategies, while Camilla realized that her own family was willing to sacrifice her reputation to protect their financial interests. The children she had raised and defended were proving to be strangers who viewed her royal status as a commodity, to be exploited rather than a responsibility to be honored. That evening, Charles arrived at Clarence's house for what both he and Camilla suspected would be their final private conversation as husband and wife. They sat in the same sitting room where they had shared countless intimate moments over the years, but now the space felt cold and formal. The Privy Council has made its recommendation, Charles began, his voice hollow. They believe your continued presence in royal life represents an unacceptable risk to the monarchy's reputation. Camilla had expected this news, but hearing it from Charles's lips still felt like a physical blow. And you agree with them? Charles looked away, unable to meet her eyes. I have to consider what's best for the institution. What about what's best for us? What about our marriage? What about the love we've fought so hard to protect? Camilla's composure finally cracked, years of royal training unable to contain her anguish. I don't know if there is an us anymore, Charles replied, his own voice breaking. The woman I married would never have allowed this situation to develop. The woman I loved would have put the monarchy's welfare above family loyalty. The accusation hung between them like a sword. Camilla realized that Charles wasn't just exiling her from royal life. He was rewriting their entire relationship, casting her as someone who had betrayed fundamental principles rather than someone who had made tragic mistakes in judgment. So this is it? She asked. After 30 years together, after everything we've survived, you're going to let them destroy us? Charles stood and walked to the window, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his crown and his choices. I'm not letting them destroy anything. You did this, Camilla. Your family did this. I'm just trying to save what can be saved. The cruelty of his words was matched only by their truth. Camilla had indeed failed to control her children's behavior, had indeed ignored warning signs that might have prevented this disaster. But Charles's willingness to sacrifice their love for institutional preservation revealed a coldness she had never seen before. When? She asked quietly. The official announcement will be made tomorrow. You'll retain the title of Queen Consort, but will have no official duties or public role. You're asked to remain out of public view indefinitely. Camilla nodded, understanding that she was being erased from royal life as efficiently as if she had never existed. The charities she supported, the patronages she had built, the public service that had given her life meaning, all of it would disappear with a single announcement. And our marriage? Charles turned back to face her, and she saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. Our marriage will continue in name only. You'll remain my wife, but we'll live separately. The palace will arrange suitable accommodations. As he left that night, Camilla understood that she wasn't just losing her royal role. She was losing the man who had been the center of her world for 3 decades. The love story that had scandalized a nation and redefined the monarchy was ending, not with passion or dramatic confrontation, but with cold institutional efficiency and the bitter taste of duty chosen over devotion. The official announcement came at precisely 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, delivered with the cold efficiency that only the British establishment could muster. Her Majesty Queen, Consort Camilla will be withdrawing from all official duties pending the completion of ongoing investigations into financial improprieties involving members of her family. The statement was clinical, devastating, and final. Within minutes, news crews descended on Clarence's house, their cameras capturing images of curtained windows and security guards refusing comment. The woman who had spent years carefully building her public image was now trapped behind those walls, watching her life's work crumble through television coverage and newspaper headlines. Camilla sat in her private sitting room, surrounded by the personal photographs and mementos that told the story of her journey from reviled mistress to respected queen consort. Each image now felt like evidence of a life that had been lived and lost. Her staff moved quietly through the house, packing belongings that would soon be moved to a grace and favor apartment in a less prominent royal property. The phone calls began immediately, friends expressing shock and sympathy, acquaintances distancing themselves from the scandal, and charities gently inquiring about the future of their royal patronages. Each conversation reinforced the reality that her royal life was truly ending. Princess Anne, Charles's sister, arrived unexpectedly that afternoon. Known for her direct manner and unwavering loyalty to the crown, she had never been particularly close to Camilla, but her presence suggested official business rather than a social call. "This is a bloody mess," Anne said without preamble, settling into a chair with her characteristic no-nonsense demeanor. But it could have been avoided. Camilla looked at her sister-in-law with tired eyes. "I assume you're here to deliver Charles's final judgment?" "I'm here because someone needs to talk sense into this family before it completely destroys itself." Anne's bluntness was refreshing after days of carefully worded diplomatic statements. "Your children are idiots. Charles is being impossibly noble about his duty to the crown, and you're playing the martyred victim. None of it is helping." The harsh assessment stung, but Camilla recognized truth in Anne's words. "What would you have me do? My children have disgraced the family name. My husband has chosen duty over our marriage, and I'm being exiled from the only life I've known for years. You could fight back properly instead of issuing pretty statements that make you look weak," Anne replied. "You could expose the whole rotten system that allowed your children to exploit their positions in the first place. You could make Charles choose between being king and being your husband instead of letting him have both while you get neither." The suggestion was both shocking and appealing. Throughout her royal years, Camilla had played by the rules, accepted criticism gracefully, and subordinated her own needs to institutional requirements. The idea of abandoning those constraints felt both terrifying and liberating. "The palace would never survive a full-scale war with me," Camilla mused. "I know too much, have seen too much, exactly. So why are you going quietly into exile when you could make them pay a proper price for sacrificing you?" Anne leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the prospect of royal rebellion. "Charles thinks he can preserve his precious monarchy by throwing you to the wolves. Make him understand what he's actually losing." That evening, Camilla made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Instead of accepting her fate quietly, she called her most trusted advisor and began planning what the media would later describe as the most explosive royal interview since Diana's Panorama appearance. The interview, arranged with the BBC's most respected journalist, would take place at Camilla's new residence, a comfortable but decidedly non-royal apartment in Kensington. The setting was deliberately chosen to emphasize her reduced circumstances while maintaining dignity. Charles learned of the planned interview through his private secretary, who delivered the news with barely concealed panic. "Your Majesty, the Queen Consort has scheduled a television interview for next week. The palace has not been consulted and we have no control over the content." The king felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had plagued him throughout the crisis. Camilla's first statement had been manageable, but a full television interview represented a complete breakdown of royal protocol and family unity. "What does she intend to discuss?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "Unknown, sir. But given the circumstances, it's reasonable to assume she may address her treatment by the family and the institution." The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the potential for catastrophe. Charles immediately called Camilla, reaching her at her new apartment where she was preparing for the interview with media trainers and advisors. "This is madness," he said without preamble. "You're going to destroy everything we've both worked for." "You already destroyed everything, Charles. I'm just making sure people understand what really happened." Camilla's voice held a steel that he had rarely heard before. "What do you want? What will it take to stop this interview?" The question hung in the air between them, representing the first time since the scandal began that Charles had acknowledged Camilla's power to fight back. For a moment she considered what it would mean to negotiate, to trade her silence for some form of rehabilitation or reconciliation. "I want the truth told about my involvement, or lack thereof, in my children's activities. I want acknowledgement that I've served the crown faithfully for years. And I want respect for our marriage instead of cold institutional efficiency. You know I can't promise those things. The investigation is still ongoing and the political situation, then you know I can't cancel the interview. Camilla's voice was calm but final. I won't be disappeared quietly, Charles. If you want to choose duty over love, you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice. The conversation ended with both of them understanding that their relationship had crossed a line from which there might be no return. Charles had chosen to sacrifice his wife for his crown, and Camilla had chosen to fight back rather than accept exile gracefully. In the days leading up to the interview, the palace worked frantically to limit potential damage. Legal advisors reviewed what Camilla could and couldn't say without violating confidentiality agreements. Public relations experts prepared response strategies for various scenarios. The king's closest advisors urged him to make one final attempt at reconciliation, but Charles remained frozen between love and duty. Meanwhile, Camilla prepared for what she knew would be the most important conversation of her life. The questions would be difficult, probing her knowledge of her children's activities, her relationship with Charles, and her feelings about her treatment by the royal family. She understood that her answers would determine not just her own future, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. The woman who had once been content to stand in Charles's shadow, supporting him quietly while building her own charitable work, was about to step fully into the spotlight. The stakes couldn't be higher. Her marriage, her reputation, her children's futures, and the stability of the institution that had both elevated and destroyed her. As she sat in her modest new sitting room, looking at photographs of happier times with Charles, Camilla understood that the fairy tale was truly over. But perhaps if she was brave enough and smart enough, she could write a different ending, one where she wasn't the victim of other people's choices, but the author of her own destiny. The interview would air in 3 days and nothing would ever be the same again. The interview aired on a Sunday evening, when families across Britain traditionally gathered around their televisions. An estimated 28 million viewers tuned in to watch Camilla, dressed simply in navy blue, sitting in her modest apartment and speaking with quiet dignity about the collapse of her royal life. I want to be absolutely clear, she said, looking directly into the camera. I had no knowledge of the extent of my children's commercial activities. When concerns were raised, I addressed them with Tom and Laura, and I was assured that everything was legitimate and proper. I trusted my children, perhaps naively, but I never knowingly allowed the royal name to be exploited for personal gain. The interviewer pressed her about specific instances where evidence suggested she might have been present during questionable conversations. Camilla's responses were measured but revealing. There's a difference between overhearing fragments of business discussions and understanding their implications. My children are adults who made their own choices. I refuse to accept responsibility for decisions I didn't make and actions I didn't take. When asked about her relationship with Charles, Camilla's composure wavered for the first time. I have loved that man for over 30 years. I stood by him through his darkest moments, defended him against criticism, and supported his vision for the monarchy. To be cast aside when my family's actions embarrassed the institution? She paused, collecting herself. It's shown me that duty will always come before love in royal life. The most devastating moment came when she was asked about her future. I remain queen consort in title, but I have no role, no purpose, no way to serve the people I care about. I've been erased from royal life as efficiently as if I never existed. The charities I supported for years have been forced to find new patrons. The causes I believed in continue without me. I've become a ghost in my own life. But it was her final statement that truly shook the establishment. The monarchy asks for devotion, sacrifice, and absolute loyalty. I gave all of those things willingly. But when I needed support, when I needed the institution to distinguish between my actions and my children's actions, I was abandoned. The British people deserve to know that this is how the royal family treats its own members when it becomes convenient to do so. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted with opinions ranging from sympathy for Camilla to criticism of the monarchy's handling of the crisis. Public opinion polls showed a sharp divide. While some viewers appreciated her honesty and vulnerability, others felt she had violated royal protocol by speaking so candidly about internal family matters. At Buckingham Palace, Charles watched the interview with his senior advisors, his face growing paler with each revelation. The woman he had married for love was systematically dismantling the carefully constructed narrative that had protected the monarchy throughout the crisis. The damage assessment will take days, his communications director reported grimly. But initial reactions suggest this has significantly complicated our crisis management strategy. What hurt Charles most wasn't the public relations challenge, but the personal revelations. Hearing Camilla speak about feeling abandoned and erased forced him to confront the human cost of his choices. The duty he had prioritized over love suddenly felt cold and hollow. The interview's impact extended far beyond public opinion. Parliament began discussing whether the monarchy's crisis management procedures needed review. Legal experts debated whether Camilla's statements created new liabilities for the royal family. International media picked up the story, analyzing what it revealed about the British establishment's treatment of women and family members who became inconvenient. Tom and Laura Parker Bowles found themselves facing even more intense scrutiny as their mother's interview drew attention to details of their business dealings that had previously remained private. The legal protections they had counted on began to weaken as public pressure mounted for full accountability. 3 days after the interview aired, Charles made an unprecedented decision. He traveled alone to Camilla's apartment, without security detail or official entourage, to have what he knew would be their final private conversation. "You've won," he said simply, sitting across from her in the small sitting room that bore no resemblance to the grand spaces they had once shared. "I haven't won anything," Camilla replied. "I've lost everything that mattered to me. My role, my purpose, my marriage. The only thing I accomplished was refusing to disappear quietly." Charles looked around the apartment, noting the carefully arranged photographs and personal items that represented the remnants of their shared life. "The advisors are recommending a full review of your exile. The public reaction has been complicated. And what do you recommend?" Camilla's question carried the weight of 30 years of relationship. Charles was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with emotions he had suppressed for weeks. "I recommend that I should have fought for you instead of sacrificing you. I recommend that I should have remembered that the woman I married had integrity, even when the evidence seemed to suggest otherwise. I recommend that I should have chosen love over duty, at least once in my life." The admission hung between them, too late to change anything but too important to remain unspoken. Camilla felt tears she had been holding back for weeks finally begin to fall. "But you didn't," she said softly. "When it mattered most, when I needed you to believe in me, you chose the crown over our marriage. I know, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life." They sat in silence as the London traffic hummed outside the windows of her modest apartment. The fairy tale that had begun decades earlier in the shadow of scandal was ending in the shadow of betrayal, but perhaps with a small measure of truth finally acknowledged between them. Charles left that evening knowing that their marriage, while it might continue in name, was truly over. Camilla remained in her exile, stripped of her royal role but having reclaimed her voice and dignity. The monarchy survived the crisis, but at a cost that would reshape how the institution treated family members for generations to come. The love story that had captivated and scandalized a nation concluded not with reconciliation or dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes duty and love are irreconcilable, and that choosing one inevitably destroys the other. In the end, Charles kept his crown but lost his heart, while Camilla lost her kingdom but found her strength. The palace gates that had once welcomed her as queen consort now stood closed to her forever, a reminder that in the calculus of royal life, love is always expendable when duty demands sacrifice.